In this episode of FSW Conversations on IT, we talk with Laura Lanteri, strategist, creative director, and filmmaker with nearly 20 years of experience in fashion, luxury, and tech. She has led campaigns for Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and Hermes, and now operates her own agency. She teaches at Parsons and is currently directing a documentary exploring beauty, capitalism, and freedom of expression in America, using a film to challenge and reshape harmful narratives in fashion and culture. So listen, Laura, we've known one another for, quite a number of years and bunch of different professional guises, and it is really a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. The pleasure, it's all mine. So happy to be here.
And you are working on just a film, I think, that will resonate with a lot of people, brings together, I think, so many important critical issues that people are focusing both, inside and outside the fashion industry. So I wonder if we could just kind of launch off by having you kind of, just describe a little bit about, what your project is, kind of how you got started and, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. To be my pleasure. So the way this film got started is, through my career and through my professional path. I worked a lot in marketing and advertising for a number of amazing luxury brands. And one of the things that I had positioned as my goals through my work, especially in advertising, was to really change the industry from within to try and make it more inclusive, more equitable, trying to change the messaging, especially for women and for young women. And naively, I thought it was really possible. And I found out the hard way that it's really, really, really hard for a number of reasons. And I decided a couple of years ago that I really wanted to take matters in my own hands in terms of messaging and to have a little bit more agency in terms of how we articulate a discussion about beauty standards and aspiration and desire and what we put forward as the ideal so many times in the luxury and fashion industry. And so I started to speak with some of my colleagues who work in luxury, and we came up with this idea around dissecting beauty standards and why, not just why they came to be, because I think there's a lot of scholars and amazing people much smarter than me. Sabrina Strings is a name that comes to mind who really have dissected why we're here and why we have the beauty ideals that we have. The question we want to explore in the film is why are we still putting up with this, especially as women, right? And I am absolutely complicit, and I do all of the things that I wonder about. But why is it still so important to present ourselves in a very narrow way? Why do we place so much value? In to how we look and how we appear, and why does it become almost a moral choice to present and to look a certain way versus anything that deviates from the norm? So the movie is really I almost think like it's a mystery movie because we're asking a lot of questions and we're trying to peel back the layers, understanding, okay, I have a certain level of self-awareness, but I still do a lot of the things that I question, right? That I still want to present myself in a certain way. And we try to understand, yes, of course, there's social media, there's messaging from advertising and luxury brands, and there's a certain amount of cultural conditioning. But there's also a lot of amazing discussion and a lot, sort of like bubbling underneath the surface. So why are we still here? And that took us on a really, really amazing journey where we talk absolutely to industry executives and advertising executives and social media managers, influencers, but also, an amazing array of people from nuns to spiritual leaders to witches and matchmakers. And we're all trying to make sense of, why are we still doing this? Why are we still narrowing the standards of beauty in such a pervasive way? So yeah, that is how it came to be. And I think, if we look at where we are today and the splash in terms of media of the Sydney Sweeney ad, I think we can agree that yeah, it's a discussion that seems to resonate with a lot of people.
I love the way that you put it, that it's a bit of a mystery movie. It's a bit of a whodunit. You got to assemble the clues. You're trying to come to, an answer, who committed the crime and maybe why. And I guess my question is a little bit, do you answer that? Do you solve the mystery? And I think that kind of overlaps with the question of whether or not there's a such thing as sustainable luxury, or is that a contradiction in terms? And I'm an economist, so I think about luxury and kind of, as a good, as a service that is almost like none other than the economy, right? I mean, no other economy in principle or no other good should, the price increases, be positively correlated with demand, right? It's a good it's not a necessity. I mean, it may be kind of hardwired into our brains to be kind of attached with luxury, but this is a product that doesn't have to exist to support human life, right? I mean, this is, above and beyond subsistence. So, which then leads me to, that to go back to that question again is, there's a trade-off between, having sustainable goods and luxury goods. Can they reside together? And kind of how do you kind of think about that in terms of solving that mystery in your film?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. So we try to solve the mystery, and I think the reason why it's really a mystery, because the cognitive dissonance at the basis of the movie and the storyline is my own cognitive dissonance, right? The distinction and the gap between my values and my own ethos, my north star, and my behavior is very real, and I live it every day. And I think it has become a very interesting and fascinating journey into the possibility of human expressions, not just in terms of how we present ourselves, but into the economic foundations of that, which goes back to your question. And the I don't want to spoil the answer, but I think we really want to look not at just one bad guy, but we want to look at human nature and, how we are predisposed to behave in a certain way. So that's sort of like how we try to allow the movie to unfold. In terms of luxury and sustainability, I think that is such a good question. And I believe it's a question that is central to a lot of brands and a lot of consumer. And I think, luxury really is an liminal space today, at least in terms of how it's perceived, consumed, and how the demand around it is shaped. In my mind, there are two very distinct elements at the core of what luxury is. And one is sort of like the tradition, heritage, the craftsmanship that makes an object so desirable and so unique and so beautiful in many ways. And the other core element is around aspiration, exclusivity, and dominance, because there's only so many Birkin bags. And if I do have a Birkin bags, or if I do have a certain luxury car, the implication is that that adds value to me almost by osmosis, and my status in society goes up in certain ways. So the way I see it, capitalism really pushed for the past few decades luxury into the realm of dominance, aspirations, and exclusivity, where it was very status driven. And this is where I think we're living this dissonance of, you know, is there a sustainability in luxury? I think it's absolutely possible. Is it true as of today? My answer would be no, it's not true. I think luxury as we package it today has been commodified. It has become yet another label that we put on a product to make it more desirable. And true luxury has become extremely rare um, to find, and even rare to find in a true sense in the business models behind it. So I think, there's a one of the ways that I think about it is that luxury has been very extractive in so many ways, in a very linear sort of, um, you know, very normative way. But there are also ways in which luxury could be regenerative and circular by nature, right? And capitalism with this sort of like rigid vertical structure has really heightened the way that we lean onto the extraction, the appropriation, and the extraction of profits without really allowing us to reimagine what it would be to have a less hierarchical, more regenerative structure around it.
Yeah. And just to kind of pull on that strand, talking about the commodification of luxury, I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the overall impetus for, I don't know, us as women going towards these sort of ideals of beauty and how we still have keep going back to the same beauty standards over and over again and kind of where that impetus comes from. And I'm just curious from your at, the link between sort of that commodification of luxury and these ideals of beauty and this sort of periodicity, if you will. The trends go from, we're in an era of body positivity, and now we're back to, the whole skinny talk thing. And, as women, you feel pulled from one extreme to another, and it's a very gender specific kind of the norm changes. I mean, there's sort of no normative expression as a woman. I'm just wondering from the work you've done in your film, how do you see women experiencing this for themselves in terms of trying to carve out their own space versus the noise we're hearing from that and the links to sort of the economics of this? Is it how do women balance that sort of internal pressure versus the external?
Yeah, that is such a resonant question for me. It's hard. That would be my first answer. And one of the things that moved me the most, and that is still motivating me as a key driver in this film, is the fact that during all the talks I had with the most amazing women in so many different industries and from so many different contexts and lived experiences, the immediate reaction I received was one of like, oh, well, I want to talk about this because you know what? I don't want to wear my hair like this, or I hate that I have to do this, or I really don't feel like myself if I present myself in this way. Um, but is there an alternative? And I think one of the things that I realized that I was trying to turn away a little bit is that the stakes are really high, and that women are not presenting themselves in a certain way because we want to, or it's fun, or because it's self-care, or because, it's a moment for us. No, 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 no. It's life or death. This is the reality. It's if I want to get a job and if I want to work with certain people, if I want to navigate certain spaces, I have to look a certain way. And a certain way is coded language for imagery that is really white supremacist and very narrow and very racist and misogynist and ableist. And we really shy away from having a conversation about how impossible that aspiration is by design because we don't want to face the fact that it was designed by a certain group of people to serve only very, very few. And we don't want to sort of reckon with the fact that, even as a white, cis, straight woman, I would never reach that aspiration. Doesn't matter what I do. And that's again by design. I can only aspire to get a little bit closer, but it's always very elusive. And I think building growth in an industry on the emotional scaffolding of women is something that really erodes the very fabric of humanity and self-worth and all of that. So you know, to answer your question, that there are a lot of different ways in which women cope, manage, or rebel against these standards. I find myself really at the center, not having figured out how to extricate myself. Um, but I think we have to recognize that there's extreme power in a capitalist society where there's so much focus on the individual and not on the collective, where it is a reality that for me, it is um, actually concretely and tangibly very hard to extricate myself from the system, to find another way to um, live my values more fully than what I do, and that is where I think the gray area lies. Right, we're all embedded in the system. How do we imagine something out of it?
And it's a complicated issue, and I think it's one that obviously gets into on the sort of esoteric side, the history of aesthetics and why are we all trying to perfect ourselves in the first place? Is it because someone else told us to, or is it something we just feel we need to do for ourselves? And that's that sort of instinct to better yourself. And then on the other hand, it's am I actually doing something that's good for me as an individual? And I see these complexities happening on social media, like literally right now with the whole, and I'm sure you've seen the whole thing over Serena Williams and taking the GLP-1s, but also not just that she's doing that, but she's like front and center as the advertiser. I mean, sorry, as the face of a wellness brand that's someone promoting these supplements. And it's the complexity of taking a stand saying, I'm glad she's doing something for her own health. But at the same time, she's putting this up as, skinny is the only way a woman should be still because she's the front of a marketing campaign, and it puts women in this complex dynamic. And I'm just curious for you. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is extremely complex, and that I think it really sheds a light on how insidious some of the aspect of the toxicity of this beauty standard is. Because I think one of the labels that we have appropriated in this type of discourse is the label around health. What is healthy and what is good for us, what is self care. And we have repackaged and commodified what that means to sell products. And I think it's really, really important to distinguish between what is really healthy, which is what your doctor knows and only your doctors know, and maybe not even them, and what you look like, right? I would never know anybody's health just by looking at them. It's impossible. I don't want to. It's none of my business. And, um, a lot of the discourse around women's body is not just one of objectification, but it's also one of evaluation. How healthy is she, right? If she looks this way, she's very healthy. If she looks that way, she's not very healthy. And it's very insidious to me because if you ask me, Laura, do you want to be healthy? I'd be like, yeah, of course. Who doesn't want to be healthy? Absolutely, right? We want to be healthy. The how and the why and the reasons and what those parameters are is very different. Like as human beings, we're all so, so, so very different. That's the beauty of it. So to me, it's similar to the discourse around tradwives, right? Uh, do we want to bake breads with our kids? Do we want to spend time with them and see them run in nature? 1000%. I want to bake breads with my kids. I want them to go and, see them run around in nature. Then, it's a slippery slope because what are you willing to sacrifice in order to do that? And how does that serve the life that you want to honor and all of your values as a woman, as a mother, and as a human being? So I think we narrow the debate around women's bodies so much, just focusing on labels and focusing on body modifications and restrictions and like can we stretch and how can we become this and transform ourselves. It's always the discourse is always around how can we change.
Yeah.
Well, how about we don't?
Yeah.
Like just
And I'm sure you've seen the social media videos. It's one that always sticks with me. It's one where they interview children and then they interview adult women about what they would change about their bodies. And the adult women are always like, why do I have to pick one thing? and they're highly critical of their physical body, and the like 5-year-olds are all like, I want wings, I want a horn, I want a tail. And it's much more fanciful and, positive. And it's so much of that complexity, I think, obviously is a complex kind of sociological kind of thing, but it shows us so much that goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really speaks to me because I always reference a study where the scientist, I think it was a Danish woman, she conducted a study around the world asking teenage girls, it was it started with like a conversation around girls looking at themselves in the mirror, and the scientist would ask, what would you change in your body, if anything? And the answer from American teenage girls was, why only one thing? I want to change my nose and this and my body and this and that. It was a list, and it was like, and she also interviewed teenage girls from indigenous groups all around the world. And some of the answers are just incredible, because the answer would be like, I'm sorry, why would I change something in my body? This is my body. It serves me quite well. I can run, I can play sports, I can eat, I can, be with my friends. Why would I change it? It was really, sort of like that they were dumbfounded. Like, what is this question? So we do have to recognize that culture, social media, certain type of capitalist push versus status driven by aspiration has a huge effect on us, and on how we think about it. It's just the nature of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's realistic and, from a kind of philosophical perspective, a, sort of a pessimistic view, because the argument is that capitalism creates a structural pressure. So anybody who participates in the capitalist system is subject to those same incentives and will then ultimately make, convergent very similar choices. And your examples showing people who are a little peripheral to that capitalist system make very different choices. But of course, capitalism is becoming, more inclusive rather than contracting.
Yeah.
And uh, that would then lead to my question. I mean, how does that sit alongside so many studies that you see in pure confession, I have some skepticism about them, that younger consumers, are willing to pay a premium for sustainable products, luxury, beauty, or otherwise. I mean, I have studies that show, compared to Gen X or older millennials, younger millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, have a certain preference for not just sustainability, but you see growth in the reusability market, that type of thing. And I have to say, in the interest of transparency, some of that research sits at direct odds with our research. But if it's true, it's kind of a ray of light saying, look, within the capitalist system, you have a generation that was raised a bit differently, and maybe they can lead to a different outcome. On the other hand, this is the generation that participates more fully in social media and in the rapid marketing machine. So it seems to me counterintuitive that to say at one stage Gen Z is going to save everybody because they're more sustainable, sort of mindful. But on the other hand, this is the generation that's most subject to the effective marketing of shall we call it the unsustainable sort of set of incentives here.
Yeah, 100%. I have the same doubts as you. I've seen those studies. From my experience working luxury and fashion apparel and accessories, I can tell you that it doesn't seem that younger consumers care at all about sustainability. And theoretically, of course, 100%. When it comes to posting on social media, or when it comes to having an interest in sustainability, I think that's very genuine and it's very real. In terms of opening the wallet and paying a premium for sustainable products, no. And I think there are various facets to it. I think there's a number of younger consumers who just expect products to be sustainable, right? It's 2025. How can we not be sustainable? Whatever that means, and maybe we can unpack, what sustainable really is. Um, And others who just, they don't have a lot of money, they have a very limited budget, they're young, and they just wanna look cool like everybody else, and they just buy whatever. I still shop at that. I still buy things at H&M. And I'm here talking about sustainability with you. So I am a contradiction and I recognize that. I have 2 kids and absolutely I shop, you know, mass market fashion for them. So I think we need to shift the conversation um, from what sells to what is good for our collective society. And I know this is very lofty. And whenever I introduce these conversations in professional environments is met with a lot of frowning. But who decided that we need to be inclusive and equitable and just and sustainable because it sells? I think that's such a contradiction in terms. Or how about we decide to create a system and a revenue model that works because that's our intention. That is what we put forward as human beings, and we decide, yeah, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to do it, which is absolutely possible. But we don't do it because it increases sales or the bottom lines or profits or any of that. I see what brings the most conversions and the most clicks and the most sales on social media, and it's not sustainability and it's not inclusivity, unfortunately. Should we do it? Yes, absolutely, 1000%. And on this, I also wanna add one, example to sort of like maybe balance the criticality of the system with some of the positive developments that I see in parts of the industry because um, I think there are really really amazing examples and islands of hope and change. One of them is brought about by this incredible Peruvian artist Sara Flores. She lives in the Amazon and she produces beautifully intricate paintings alongside her community. And the amazing thing, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, is that all of the dyes are sourced from the vegetation around her and from her environment. So it's incredibly sustainable just because she produces in the Amazon, the forest, and it's a very communal effort. And of course she's the individual artist. So what happened is that Dior, Tara Flores is a pretty major artist, and she was her work was shown all around the world, and Dior saw her work and decided to propose a collaboration to her, I believe, for one of their bags. And the way that this incredible artist, who is in her 70s, structured the collaboration was through a very collaborative, non-hierarchical profit share agreement with her entire community. So all the profits that she's making out of this collaboration with Dior are shared with her community, because one of the principles that move all of her work and her life is reciprocity, not just with her people, but with the environment, with the context that they live in. And the amazing and incredible things about her is that the somebody started proposing a documentary on this collaboration just because it is very peculiar and sort of unheard of in the luxury industry. And Sarah Flores's response was, yes, if I can be the producer, so if I can have agency in the storytelling, how I am presented, how my story is presented, how my community is presented, and if I can have part of the profits, I can share them with my community. I think that's incredible. It's brilliant. I love it so much. So, yeah, there are examples like this. Not many, but we can all be inspired, I think, by Sarah Flores, and just really be in awe of their creativity, because I think what that is showing us is that there are solutions, but they're not within a capitalist structure. They're like completely outside of the realm of, a Western capitalist model. They're just different universe.
Yeah, and I love that example. And if I can kind of channel kind of Nobel laureate Paul Romer, at the heart of unlocking the sustainability problem is a failure of human creativity. That is, we're looking for that spark of how we can introducing new elements to capitalism without necessarily bringing down everything that has worked. I mean, free trade has worked; it has reduced poverty, but it's created costs as well. So how can we keep the elements that are working and introduce something that in some senses is a problem that humanity has never had to deal with before, which is worrying about the long-term ecological consequences of what we're doing. And let's face it, it's not a great human trait. Intergenerational equity generally, particularly given some of these problems on ecology or, the impact are difficult to measure with certainty because we just don't have that past, right? So, and I guess when I look back on when humans have successfully dealt with problems where there was a market outcome that was at odds with what was best for society. Economists traditionally call those market failures and say, well, look, this is one of these areas where the market, though it's efficient, can deliver the wrong outcome because it provides perverse incentives. And so the answer is some sort of government intervention to align the incentives and to make sure that the prices, in this case for luxury goods, reflect the true costs of those luxury goods all the way down the supply chain. And I guess, for the purposes of your film, and you kind of look forward to how this mystery is solved, you know, do you have faith in the regulations that you're seeing? I mean, there's been some news out of Europe, that looks compared to the rest of the world very, very positive, but I don't know on an absolute basis whether it's, anything to celebrate. And perhaps there's already, we're seeing some watering down of these, to be honest with you, I've kind of lost track of it a little bit because if you don't follow it every day, sometimes, it's difficult to keep track of what's news and what's noise and what's real action. But do you see any kind of optimistic story there, or am I kind of thinking about this all wrong?
In terms of regulation,
Yeah.
oh, as an Italian, I am a lot more of a proponent of regulations in media, social media, and technology and the economy than the Americans. I The question that now has become pervasive and very powerful is, how do we trust the people drafting the regulation to have the best interest of the collective community that they're supposed to take care of at heart, right? That has become very much blurred because, on one hand, it's very hard to trust data nowadays, and it's just unfortunately the moment we are in time. And so in my world and in the bubble I live, I think I trusted it. I see that the regulation, especially in Europe, around sustainability has produced a lot of positive outcomes. It has also become this Byzantine labyrinth of bureaucracy that is really hard to navigate. But there's definitely positive outcomes. I think, like, I'm as a parent, I'm a huge proponent of regulation of social media and technology all across the board. I think there should be guardrails for safety of children, just because if things are too accessible, it is just very dangerous. However, I I also want to pause and think about, why do we need regulation, right? Because we're thinking still in a framework that revolves around sort of like a capitalist and Western economies power structures that are very, very hierarchical. So where the focus is very much on the individual and on the profits of the individual versus like the collective. And in my mind, if we manage as a society to really center the good of the community, of our community, um, around sustainability and the earth and the environment and what is healthy for our children, the air we breathe and the product we use, the clothes that we put on our skin. I think naturally the system would bend towards different um, business model, revenue models, and supply chain models, and we would need less regulation. I think if we started to regulate sustainability in the United States as Europe has done, it would take, I don't know how many years to even just make sense of it, because it's so inherently different. And the supply chain structure has evolved around extracting resources in the most efficient and profitable way, and not around, I want to keep this beautiful earth that we have, and allow future generations to thrive. The way that we see it is like, oh, we're growing cotton, let's do it in a way that's not completely destructive, so that for a couple of years I can still grow cotton, or I can extract resources and materials. That is such a dominant way of thinking. Like, why do we have the right to do so? Who gave us the right to do that? So
Yeah.
I don't understand.
And I guess that kind of leads to our last question in a way, in kind of pulling together some of these strings, which is, can a radically reimagined, kind of luxury industry, and then to look specifically at the issue touched upon in your film, the beauty industry, one rooted in equity and ecological care and cultural respect, can it exist within a capitalist framework? Is there a way we can kind of end this mystery story with a kind of a a positive feeling, and maybe a positive direction forward?
I think that's really the central tension, um, and something that drives my days and my work constantly. I want to believe that the answer is yes, that we can reimagine luxury around sustainability and either a different type of capitalism, or a different economic structure and system that can allow us to live our values more fully. And eh, but I also recognize, and I want to recognize, that there's the pull towards the status quo is incredibly pervasive and hard to escape. So to me, we can find solution not within the current system, but outside of the current system, and truly outside of the Western framework of that's I know very well of economic theory, which has been, by the way, stress tested by the current administration in all sort of ways, and that has proved to be not so useful to understand the economy. So I think we can say what we know about the economy is a little bit out of the window right now. So from that standpoint, maybe this is a moment ripe with opportunity, where a lot of the things we believe were true, right? Like, for my books, when I was in school, unemployment now should be much higher, inflation should be much higher. The job market would be very different. So there are a lot of question marks I think we haven't figured out, in terms of the economy, what really drives consumer behavior and business behavior. And having talked to so many amazing women, I really think that the hope, and maybe just a hope for a conversation and for brainstorming of new system, comes from this island of extreme difference, of people who have decided to anchor their behavior, their lives, and their lifestyle into something completely different. And one of these women that I talked to recently, she introduced herself to me as a witch. And I thought that was the most powerful way of sort of signifying and articulating the fact that, as a woman, she doesn't operate within the current system, but she had detach herself completely from a system that wants women to be somewhat pliable and sort of pleasant and nurturing and nice to deal with. And that was like a very strong sort of label that she put at the beginning of our conversation. And in the same way, I see a lot of artists and women who write about art and women who write about monsters and women artists who reimagine femininity as a monstrosity, just because again we really need to detach this the gender binary, and especially all the archetypes around women, um, from what we have traditionally seen. So to me, a lot of the possibility for sort of either new capitalist or new luxury, capitalist economy or new luxury comes from uh, drawing from the entire realm of the feminine, which is both in men and women. And really being inspired by the circularity and the fringes of the wide spectrum of women's behavior and possibilities, and really not limiting ourselves to just seeing the world through this very narrow lens, by expanding our horizon and thinking, yeah, maybe I want to be a witch, and that's great. And that's something to be really celebrated. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh,
uh,
completely. And I mean, I have this thought in my head all the time as a woman, that the kind of current capitalist system, it is very sort of traditionally masculine in its sort of, entire, model. And I love this idea of moving outside of that into a different type of framework, and new business models may emerge for brands by kind of shifting that sort of thinking, but also even your mindset and methodology into, kind of a new way of approaching, what beauty means, what a brand should be, what we're doing for, you know, our own appearance, and then for the earth, and this sort of more symbiotic relationship between people and, the environment around us.
yeah. And last thing, but this triggers something in me. Um, even just like scrolling on our phone, right? I never thought about it, but then a client of mine, this amazing woman, pointed that to me. Scrolling on our phone is very linear, and it's always very linear. A lot of the things that we do in life, consumer behavior, the way that we buy things on e-commerce, everything is very along, sort of like linear axis. And after learning more about the divine feminine and how much more ancient cultures thought about femininity and the divine feminine, it's very circular, and it's very interconnected, and the lines are blurred and softer. And I think, a again, it's a part that is present in both men and women and across all, the gender spectrum. But we want to embrace that, right? If you were like an artist or an architect, or, and you had like a giant set of tool, why would you only use two, right? We want to use everything we have at our disposal as humans. And I think right, embracing the expansion of that really could make a big difference.
I love that. And I know some indigenous cultures have the notion of the sacred hoop for both, kind of time based, and this whole idea of experience being, almost spherical, and this sort of more holistic, kind of view of life, death, and, kind of experience with all of that. And I think, just as a final thought, um, what responsibility do you think brands have to sort of, try to, reimagine how they're, selling to women within this sort of more expanded mindset, and any kind of, things they can think about, or, approach things differently that you would advise?
That's a really tough question. It's a very tough question because we can be lofty. I'm lofty. Sometimes I've been lofty in this podcast and talk about principles and ethos and values. But the reality is that, there's a lot of people working for brands. And if all of a sudden we put forward a completely different type of advertising and messaging, and if we completely drastically shifted beauty standards in a way that would feel um, more fair, more just, and more inclusive, and more equitable, uh, most likely, businesses who do that, it's very rare that a business can be fully sustainable and inclusive and equitable and make a lot of money. And there's a lot of people whose livelihood depends on these brands. So to me, I'm very reticent, I'm very wary of asking brands to change the way that they do business, because I think that especially in the United States, where we don't have universal health insurance, and where if you don't have a job, it's extremely hard to get health insurance, to get other jobs, and there is no right to shelter or to food, and you can be a veteran and be on the streets, unfortunately, and that's a reality. I'm very wary that having a choice is a huge privilege in this economy. Having the choice to buying organic food, more sustainable product, to think about more inclusive practice for many people, it's a privilege. And if you are a brand and you're employing hundreds or thousands of people, it's a really, really tough choice. So to me, it shouldn't, and if a brand doesn't do it, the other person would do it. And the same with social media in my mind. Um, I, I think, of course, there's the responsibility. There should be guardrails, and we should protect our children. But um, I think that the system and the society we live in has a lot of responsibility for how we live. I think if, you know, a- again, if we reimagine the foundation, if we had universal health care, if we had a right to shelter and to, the bare minimum that makes a dignified life where people can feel okay about putting food on the table for their children, um, we would all make very different choices in terms of consumerism and in terms of reciprocity. So, yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard for brands. I think we're really trapped into a corner. And I wish we could reimagine truly a more reciprocal society, which again is very lofty, but I think that's more doable than a lone brand. Patagonia is great. Uh, and again, they have a lot of privilege that they have built through brilliant work, and they are sort of a unicorn.
Well, listen, Laura, this you have taken us through, I think, a real tour de force, both the lofty as well as kind of the nuts and bolts. We've done kind of top down and bottom up, and it just shows you, how deep and multifaceted the kaleidoscope is in trying to kind of align, luxury, beauty, sustainability, a variety of different social changes that are also moving at the same time and impinge on both. I mean, I think it's such a a complex puzzle that you've kind of helped kind of shape for us. And I know everybody will be looking forward to the release of your film and your thoughts kind of projected in that space. When should the film be available?
I would say hopefully end of next year. So it's yeah, we're still filming, we're in production, and we'll do some editing and hopefully some festival submissions, and then we'll wait for distribution. So yeah, thank you for asking, and thank you for the thoughtfulness of your questions, and thank you for yeah, allowing me to go to swerve a lot. That was fun and interesting, and I think conversations like this really are sort of like what a north star for so many of us, where we can sort of resonate and discuss and think about things, and hopefully, and I know we're almost done, but I also love the fact that, this can be discussions where we don't always agree, right? And we have different opinions, and we come together with such warm respect for each other ideas. And I really wish there were more of this, of what you guys are doing.
Great. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a brilliant discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I kind of forgot the cameras are rolling and the lights were on. It was actually a discussion.
Same, same. Thank you so much.